Agents have become very powerful with me and what I'm doing on a daily basis. I've since changed startups to the agricultural sector where we built a smart AI assistant, which is powered by a number of different agents.
What actually makes agents smart?
Well, it all really comes down to their ability to reason and plan. So that's a key aspect of agents. You really have to have an agent when you're sending a sort of a task to an agent. It understands what that task or that goal is and being able to decompose that goal into tasks. A lot of the early language models, it was just sort of you send a message and a response.
Micheal Lanham, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for
Super
having me.
excited for absolutely super excited for this one. So today we'll talk about AI agents, a little bit about your book, which we'll talk about also in a couple of minutes, and maybe kind of let's call it demystifying the topic of AI agents. Because when I talk to a lot of companies, agencies, they sometimes have the misconception that a rule-based system is an AI agent. AI-assisted systems are agents. So we want to clarify a little bit what are agents, AI agents to begin with. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty, Michael, who are you in the first place, and what are you working on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I'm tech and innovator and working in the all sorts of different environments for the last 30 years. Got into machine learning, deep learning about the turn of the century, so the 2000s. From there, I just worked in a number of oil and gas companies. Was primarily the main focus in my area because it's a key area. It's a key industry in my area. But I've looked at a lot of deep learning through that period. COVID hit. I went to a startup called Cement. Worked with them as a AI lead of the group. We were still doing at Cement. We were doing a lot of work on NLP, natural language processing, understanding how we're communicating with customers was a big part of what Cement was doing, sort of understanding and using behavioral tactics. And with that, we would use NLP, natural language processing, to classify sentiment of customers, problems, if they're having a COVID issue or stuff like this. So automatically classifying those messages and routing them to particular areas. What we found, though, with the first release of ChatGPT 2022 is that large language models have become so powerful, they could start to classify, they could start to generate these messages we were sending. And from there into 2023, we started to work on the concept of agents or entities that could do these things for us. And from there, I just sort of took that concept, rolled with it, built agentic systems. Agents were becoming very popular at the time, but I had built agentic systems and then worked up the whole concept of agentic workflows and just using agents to do a lot of automation and things that could be useful in businesses to automate a lot more of the intelligent tasks, right? So we have a lot of automation stuff that does a lot of work in um, automating services or transforming data and stuff like this. But using agents and intelligence to do some of these things, you have decision points that now can be controlled by AI that can map how these processes are actually being more effective in what they're doing. So from there, worked on and developed a number of agent concepts, principles, workflows to write a book about it. So started writing the book in 2023. The book wasn't actually published in 2025 for just it wasn't like AI agents. People thought I was crazy when I first started developing this stuff, right? Like everybody was like, "Well, that's not going to work." It's. And at the time, admittedly, we're using models like GPT-3.5 and 4. They weren't very powerful, and their ability to do agents and agency wasn't very powerful. But over time, now we're seeing models that are able to do a lot of agency. They're a lot of using a lot of tools. They're a lot of do a lot of reasoning and planning and solving tasks. So concepts like using agents for deep research, you know, it's really a game changer because you can actually have an agent go out and do all this research for you, build all these things, and come back with all this information and in a nice presentable format. And then you have this, and you have you know what I often do now is I have a team of agents who go off and build PowerPoint presentations. If I have a concept, write out a prompt, 5 minutes, and it comes back with a PowerPoint presentation. And now with Nano Banana Pro, it comes back with some really awesome images and stuff like that. So Yeah, agents have become very powerful with me and what I'm doing on a daily basis. I've since changed startups to the agricultural sector where we built a smart AI assistant, which is powered by a number of different agents. It's powered by a whole agentic workflow, if you know.
Hmm. Super interesting. And maybe a more personal, or maybe let's call it a philosophical question. Why and how did you fall in love with AI? Why AI in the first place? And when you wrote a book about it, Michael, right? You have to have a strong, let's say, external or internal motivation to in order to write a book, right? About something that fascinates you. So, what was the actual motivation, and why did you fall in love with AI?
Well, ever since I started using computers in the 70s and programming and stuff like that, AI was sort of always this holy grail, right? A holy grail of using computers. It was like, watching 2001 A Space Odyssey and seeing these AI sort of do their things. It was just really powerful and very attractive that, yeah, if we could get a computer to do this stuff, it would be really interesting and the possibilities would be incredible. And it's just sort of that base love of things. And then working through deep learning, working through a lot of generative AI. I've written a number of books on generative AI using GANs, generative adversarial networks, um, diffusion, a number of those things. So a lot of my writing previously was in deep learning and machine learning. A lot of it was in deep reinforcement learning. So I've developed a number of books where I talked about deep reinforcement learning agents and what they could do, right? And that was always where we thought things would go was with deep reinforcement learning. We thought we'd be training these deep reinforcement learning agents, and I've built a couple agents to actually do things in the oil and gas industry, but they never were quite there, right? Like deep reinforcement learning is a really powerful concept, and it's sort of pushed the large language models to where we see them now, but it's very expensive. Deep reinforcement learning, the training cycle, and all those things are very expensive. So it's not so practical. We're getting a lot more of that with large language models and AI agents powered with large language models. But still think there's another sort of hump we have to clear till we get sort of this true vision of AI. And I think we're seeing that now a little bit with these reasoning and blending models, but we'll see how it comes. Like we still don't have an AI that can learn dynamically and teach itself and remember. Google has done some work in areas with that where they're actually having large language models using memory. That looks very promising to open up these things, right? So that when you talk to a large language model, it actually starts to remember, or not just a large language model, but an AI, it starts to remember and learn and teach itself. That's really the sort of the holy grail now.
Hmm. Because of so many misconceptions, maybe Michael, let's talk about some of the misconceptions, which is if someone prompts ChatGPT, is that already interacting with an agent, or is an agent something entirely different?
Yeah, so this question has evolved over the last few years, right? Like I don't know if people remember you used to go to ChatGPT initially, and they introduced this concept of tools or actions, if you will, and you would sort of call this tool, and it asked you if you could use it, if they you could use the tool and do whatever you needed to. Um, this concept has been sort of pushed with MCP and Claude. So if you have Claude Desktop, you can download any number of MCP servers connected to your desktop. You can ask Claude to use these servers, but as it's going through and using these various tools, it's asking you to use these tools. Um, that sort of whole human in the loop of using tools, though, is sort of blurred now. So now, if you go to ChatGPT and you type a prompt and you ask it to do something, it inherently uses tools. It uses web search. It'll create images for you if you ask it the right thing, right? So that it's kind of been blurred. So what I usually tell people is, you're still when you're with a ChatGPT, it's on the verge of being an agent, but a real agent has agency and the ability to make decisions and go off and do things. So yes, in ChatGPT, if you click deep research, if you click their agent feature, you're getting into that agency and giving an LLM the power to go off and do things for you. But generally, when you're with ChatGPT and you're just typing and doing prompts, you're still closer to an assistant. But that's really getting blurred, right? Like I think pretty soon we'll be interacting with agents rather than just assistants. Like we won't be talking to chatbots anymore. You'll probably be just talking to agents, and you'll ask the agent to go do something. It'll do some things. A really cool thing now that a lot of people are ChatGPT has just released is the ability for you to ask, GPT Pro to go do something. It'll go fire off, and it's working away, and it's quite slow. Sometimes 10 minutes. But then you can still talk to the AI. You can still talk to it and ask questions. You can tweak your response and stuff like that. That's what we're seeing. So we're seeing now that ChatGPT, for instance, has this sort of gate agent that's sort of telling other agents to do things. And I think that's where we're going to see agency go in the next short while, in the next year or so.
That's definitely going to be some exciting times. When we talk about agent, is an agent just an agent, or are there different types of agents when we talk about this term? I mean, it could mean everything, but also nothing, right?
Yeah. So, and some of this is getting blurred now. When you're actually talking about an agent, oftentimes, if it's an orchestrator agent or it's an agent that's sort of going off and using other agents, you may think of it as an agent, but there's actually a whole number of agents working behind the scenes. That doesn't mean that they're different agents. Agents by themselves, we just generally define an agent as an entity that has agency, and the ability to make decisions. So that means they can go off and do tasks and complete goals. And that means that agents can call and talk to other agents to go off and have them do tasks. You could have agents go off and tell a number of different agents in parallel to do a number of different tasks. They can come back and complete this work. What we're seeing now, though, is this concept of not just having agents, but agent workflows or AI workflows, where you're talking to a workflow, which might be in part some intelligent agents in that piece, but also maybe some um, programmatic code or code pieces are actually doing some sort of automation or effort for you, either as part of the agent's tools or just in the process itself. And those are becoming very powerful. This concept of AI workflows and you interacting with an AI workflow is becoming more powerful. So it's kind of a stand above agents where the workflow is sort of coordinating a bunch of agents to do things for you, and it could be a number of whole different tasks. Like you could have a workflow where I want you to work with my email. So you'll have a number of agents. One of them might be loading up your email, responding to messages, booking your calendar and stuff like this. So you could have a whole bunch of agents in this workflow monitoring and managing your email, for instance.
Mhm. I'm wondering, I mean, I believe Google said it that 2025 is the year of the agents, Micheal. Now, the question is, everybody calls everything an agent, right? Especially, let's say they work with low code environments such as N8N. Now, the question arises, and also probably something super helpful for the listeners of this podcast. When am I supposed to use an agent? And when is it okay to just have a rule based or use a rule based system?
Yeah, so this is kind of the way a lot of people are now approaching this, right? Like it's not necessarily a rule based system. Maybe you want some intelligence in there, so maybe it's not an agent, but it's a prompt,
Hmm.
right? So you have a prompt that's doing things, or you have a prompt that's going off and getting information, or making a decision for you, right? It's not really an agent. You're not giving an agency. And what we're seeing is people have built agents. Agents can go off and do these things. But if your agent is always doing a particular set of tasks, does it really make sense for the agent to do those tasks? So that's why we're getting to this concept of AI workflows. You mentioned N8N, that's becoming a really powerful platform. Langflow, Agent Builder from OpenAI, for instance, is another one. These are the way people are approaching them now. So it's not just sort of an agent, but it's an AI workflow or it's an agentic system, if you will, right? So there might be a number of different parts where one part is you're using an agent, another part you only need to use a prompt, some other parts you're just using programmatic code to do stuff, right? So it's really agents are kind of evolving into AI workflows. This is what we're going to, I think, see in 2026 is the emergence of these AI workflows that are using agents and other things to pull these things together. Because in practicality, having or agents do everything is very expensive sometimes, right? If you're
Hmm.
having an agent do tools, and it's always using those same tools, you could just do that programmatically, and it's probably cheaper, right? You're not paying for tokens to go off and push a tool description to an LLM and say, give me an answer, when you know what the answer is, that you're going to use the tool with these parameters, or you can define these things. So we're kind of decomposing agents and agent systems into key pieces, and then making the agents sort of critical to some areas of those workflows. But I think it's really the workflow itself. Like we're getting more comfortable. We're working all these systems and integrating pieces all together. You know, with tools like init and line flow and stuff like that, make it really powerful to do those things. Um, that's why I'm saying like AI workflows are really going to become the big thing. I think in the next year.
Hmm. One question that I think might also be super helpful to hear your answer on is, Michael, you're an expert in this topic. You've been working with AI systems and agents for a long time, also deep learning and reinforcement learning. How do you keep up to date with all the changes? I mean, when we go on archive, I mean, there's just so many papers coming out. So how do you keep yourself up to date, especially when it comes to agents? Like, do you just live in the tools and build on top of them, or how do you keep yourself updated on a day-to-day basis? Do you research stuff on X? Are you active on LinkedIn? How do you do it yourself?
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm doing is using AI to go off and search and do stuff. So I might do on a daily basis two or three or maybe five deep research agents going off and doing something for me. I rarely I rarely go through something and look through something on my own anymore, unless I sort of see it as a this is cool. I'll get deep research agents to go off and do these things pretty much on a daily basis. I'm even sort of developing NNA workflows and line flow workflows that I have running on a computer in the background that goes off and does these things and gives me this information. Working in a startup, I also have to sort of be cutting edge, looking for the most recent tools,
Hmm.
most recent patterns. You know, a big pattern that we often consider with agents are access to RAG. So retrieval augmented generation are a big thing that we're using. You know, memory is another big one, and integrating those types of systems to allow agents to have knowledge or access to knowledge and being able to apply and look at that knowledge. So a couple of key areas that I'm working on with agents right now are doing deep research analytics. So building or using agents to go off into your organization's data systems, and you know, you've been able to ask the question, what's the average customer's return rate on this product or something like that, right? And you could have an agent go off and mine your database for this information, come back, look through all the records and stuff like that, and give you a report. That's become very, very powerful. Like just to have a talk to an AI to go off and do that becomes really powerful. Yeah. So I can't remember the question now. Sorry.
No, that's all good. But I wanted to talk next about, Michael, the building blocks of AI agents. So, how is an agent actually built from fundamental? If you think about a Lego system, right? What are some of the, let's say, 4 or 5 key pieces or elements that make up an LLM agent or agent itself?
Yeah. So actually, in my book, I have what I talk to is a concept of evolved is the 5 layers of agents, and at the sort of the core layer is the core of the persona of the agent. So what are the basic instructions you're going to give that agent? The second is tools, right? So the tools would be the second layer where you know agents really aren't doing anything until you give them tools. Right? So you need to understand what those tools are, what tools you're giving to an agent. The next one is reasoning and planning. So this is in the third layer because you know often sort of don't get into working with reasoning and planning until you need to have your agents work with a couple of different tools, and or it's working with a couple of different tools, or it's using tools to take the output of one tool as the input into another tool. So then you need to have better reasoning and planning. You need to have your agent to think better. There is a bunch of reasoning models now that sort of do that automatically for you, but those reasoning models, I often turn the reasoning down low on the models I'm using, for instance, because I often construct how I want them to think. So reasoning and planning is sort of a key area that it's good for you to understand that. The next is knowledge and memory, right? So knowledge and memory in agents can be a real sort of really major addition. Not just knowledge, you know, asking about information about your own documents, but memory is a key one. Adding the right type of memory to your system can make a big difference between how you perceive that agent to be interacting with you. It's kind of like you're giving the agent the ability to learn by giving it some memory, right? So it can remember previous events and stuff like that. And the last one is evaluation and feedback. Evaluation and feedback is something um, often overlooked. We often forget that when we're building agents, we need to know and understand how they work and how they work for a particular question and what the output is. So in the systems that I'm developing, we have sort of a test set, a benchmark, if you will, of we introduce a question to the agent. It's a agricultural question, like how do I change the belt of my combine? And we know what the answer is, right? We baseline those things so we can get consistent with the input and the output. That's very important if you're building production systems, is understanding how you're evaluating your agents to make sure they're doing the activities and solving the goals and completing the tasks that you expect. And then feedback. Feedback is a big one because you have feedback from humans that can give you, say, well, this isn't quite right. I need this to be improved. But you can also use feedback in agents. You can use agents to critique other agents to say, I've looked at your output. I don't think it's grounded in the information that you were given, right? So you could have grounding agents, you could have critic agents, but you could also have agents feeding information back to agents in the form of memory saying, okay, you did this. I think next time you should do this, and push that back as a memory. So the next time when it sees that, it can take that into account of that feedback. That's pretty advanced, but it's some pretty powerful things you can do with this sort of progression of layers.
Hmm. From the five building blocks, Michael, what are some of the pitfalls that people can run into? Especially, I mean, when we build a persona, we've learned when ChatGPT came out shortly after 2022 that, well, there's specific frameworks that you can use on how to prompt these systems and so on and so forth. But are there maybe some tips and tricks from your side how to write a better prompt, how to build better agents? Some quick tips.
Yeah, so the big issue that I think newcomers have is you built an agent and it does something cool, then you start adding more tools to it, right? You say, okay, I want my agent who can book my travel. Now I want it to book a car and I want it to book my flights and so forth, right? So
Hmm.
you're asking the single agent to do too much. So you get into the problem of writing these big, huge prompts, right? You're writing all these prompts to do a whole bunch of things, work with a whole bunch of tools. The other problem you get is you start consuming a lot of tools for your agent, and models are getting more intelligent, but it's you still have the you still have the decision making, and providing it with a whole bunch of tools sort of provides a whole bunch of decisions it can make and a whole bunch of paths, right? So what I generally recommend is build your agents in small, compact, very focused elements, and then string those things together, either in sort of a flow pattern, like an assembly line, if you will, or you can use it as an orchestrator, which is more advanced, where that one single agent then is sending messages to sub agents. Or as I said, you have the assembly line, right? So if in the case of the book travel example, you might have an agent that first says book your flights, and if it finds those flights, it passes that information on to another agent, which is maybe booking your hotels. And then once you understand where you're going and stuff like that, then maybe it's booking your car rentals or so on, right? As an example, but it's essentially becomes an agentic system with multiple agents doing what you need to do.
Hmm. Then there's this hot topic of prompt engineering versus context engineering. Do you think it's hot air, or is there really a system on how to engineer the perfect prompt or the context for the agent?
Yeah, so that's always really tricky. Prompt engineering, like a lot of people think of prompt engineering as this holy grail, and it's not really. There's a number of sort of key principles of prompt engineering, like making sure that you're structuring your prompts okay, you're laying out your information correctly, you're letting the AI know what each section is. You want to make sure you have a progression of rules, for instance. And then when you're introducing context sections, which could be through a number of different ways, like for prompt templates to giving it more context in the form of memory, knowledge, or whatever, or even just past experiences, or I think what you might be referring to as DSPy that uses sort of these patterns, if you will, of pushing things together, right?
Hmm.
Um, I've just found that it's better to be more flexible with prompt, but I know people have had successes with other methods as well. But you know, it's kind of like if you're going to an image model, video model, people recommend, oh, you have to use JSON. And then other people are saying, no, you don't have to use JSON. You just have to structure your prompt really well. So it kind of depends on your use case and what you feel comfortable with. I think that's really the main thing is what you sort of feel comfortable with and what you can sort of manage doing and what so that you're not overloading the LLM with your response, be it LLM or generative AI with your sort of input, and understanding how to change and update that is probably the, the most important thing I think people can take away.
Yeah. I would be interested. Have you done some tests, JSON versus XML versus Markdown? Did you get better results using one over the other, or?
It depends on the problem. It depends on the model. So
Hmm.
that's like it. Yeah, like so we often use in a lot of our agentic systems we have structured output, right? So we have the structured output. We push that in. We've used JSON for a lot of things, but JSON it's nice for some things, but I often actually, for instance, if I'm passing a message or a bunch of information from one agent to another, I'll convert it to YAML or I'll convert it to a simpler format. Um, JSON is kind of token heavy. I like YAML because it's sort of you can quickly open it up and see the information all really quickly. But there's other ways that people can sort of structure that input in that you're carrying. Um, yeah, again, it depends on the model. Depends on what you're comfortable with. Yeah, so like I think was it Flux just released a new model yesterday, and I think it was heavily trained on JSON. So they're recommending people use JSON, for instance. We're probably going to see stuff like that, right? So people are going, they're going to recommend to use for this model JSON or something like that, and that really goes into a lot of how they train the model. So if that's one sort of aspect, then maybe you should need to focus on that.
Hmm. Let's talk about multi-agent systems. So you talked about this assembly line system, right? Is that a multi-agent system then, or would you define it differently?
No, I would call that a multi-agent system. Yeah, there's multiple agents working together, and you have to understand what each of those agents are doing. And there's whole different patterns of multi-agent systems that we can work with.
Hmm. But you would always recommend going back to what you said before, right? Every agent should basically have their speciality in what they focus on, so to not mix context or whatever, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes,
Hmm.
exactly.
So a lot of people would call AI artificial intelligence, so an intelligent system. But what actually makes agents smart? What is it? Is it the RAG? Is it something else? Like, how would you define smartness or intelligence in agents?
Well, it all really comes down to their ability to reason and plan, right? So that's a key aspect of agents, and you really have to have an agent when you're sending a sort of a task to an agent. It understands what that task or that goal is, and being able to decompose that goal into tasks,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of the early language models, it was just sort of you send a message and it responds, right? It wouldn't break down, it wouldn't decompose anything into steps. So we use these sort of tools in prompting called step by step. Think step by step. It'll sort of think step by step, or you say use chain of thought to think through this problem. That's sort of a way of prompting the LLM or AI to do this for you. But intrinsically, you want the model to be able to sort of look at a look at a problem or question or whatever the user is entering, decompose that into tasks that it could then go off and solve or answer, right? Um, and that's really one of the other key things that makes an agent agentic is the ability to look at something, break it down, and then isolate each of those tasks, complete each of those tasks as it needs to, look at the output from those tasks, react to that output, and observe what the output is and feed that back into the system, essentially into a loop, if you will. I call it the sense, plan, act, learn loop, or people will call it the react loop. React and observe is
Hmm.
another pattern that people have talked about. But to make an agent, you really have to have the ability for the model to do that loop, right? And some models, like the instructor models, some other models, which are more back and forth, they don't have a good ability to do that loop. So they don't really become good models for agency or working on agentic tasks. And you'll often hear people talking about, oh, this Kimi K2 is really good because it can do agentic work really well. And the key thing about that is it can do what I just said. It can take something, break it out, decompose it into tasks, understand what each of those tasks need to do, and then sort of work on each of those tasks and understand and observe what it's doing, and then feeding that back into itself and looping it.
That makes sense. Yeah. I would be quite interested in your experience, Micheal, in terms of like what are the most exciting use cases you've worked on with agentic systems, and what are some of the worst use cases you've worked on? Because I know everybody talks about how great agents are, but obviously there are some of the cases that we've heard from you before, right in the beginning of the podcast, where agents just don't really make sense. So maybe you can talk about the good side, but also the bad side of agents, where it doesn't make sense at all.
Okay. Well, the good side is I found agents to be really powerful doing deep research stuff. Like, you can give an agent a goal to do something, it goes off and searches, mines the systems for information. That to me is a really powerful thing. Um, and I've been really successful in building those types of agents. The agents that haven't been so successful, um, I have built a number of sort of personal agents that may go off and do stuff or try and do things. And I sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. Like I'll have them go off and check emails or do stuff like that, and they're often they could be consistent for a while, but then they might change and do something different, and that can really screw you up. So it's one of these things that, yeah. Well, the key takeaway is you have to be very careful with what you understand how the agent is doing what it needs to do, so that that whole evaluation thing is really important. Um, but understand what the agent's doing. So if you start to rely on the agent and it breaks, you either know how to fix it or replace it quickly, I guess.
Hmm. Maybe some actionable tips for our listeners. What are some of the learnings, not only for agentic systems, Micheal, but the things that you've learned over the last years? I mean, you've been working on agent systems for multiple years now and deep learning. Maybe your top three or top five learnings and misconceptions that you had before, where you completely changed your mind, something that's maybe also actionable for the listeners when they're working on AI systems. Would you follow the divide and conquer approach? How would you solve problems more effectively now with your knowledge that you didn't have before? What would be your tips?
Okay, well, this is a big one. Yeah, the biggest thing I think a lot of people fail to recognize is the need to evaluate what an agent does, right? Or need to understand what your agent's doing and what the outcome of the output is. Oftentimes, when beginners start to use agents, they're getting it to go off and do something, but they're not really too concerned about what the output of that something is. Like they'll have the output come back, but this is where evaluation is key, right? So understanding what your agents are, what the input is and the output is pretty important, and what your sort of goal is, and aligning to that goal and making sure the agent follows that. The next tip I would say is really sort of do yourself a favor and understand prompt engineering, and prompt engineering that relates to the models or the family of models you're using, right? So a lot of models, OpenAI's family of models, are very consistent with the sort of prompting you use. The language is very consistent, right? For instance, I have a prompt that I use for a really popular piece of work. I'll feed it to the OpenAI family of models, and it comes back and does what I expect almost every time. I feed it to Gemini. It'll sometimes do what I expect. I feed it to Claude, and it's maybe not doing what I expect. So, understanding the models you're working with and how they're sort of reacting with agent tasks are pretty important. The last one is just don't not taking the approach that you need to use agents for everything. That you can actually, and it will save you time and money without having to manage agents to do these things. So something I often do now is decompose agents. I'll look at what the agents are doing, and I know, for instance, if the agent's always calling the same tool or always doing the same thing in this pattern, then I'll break that out of the agent and just sort of do it as an input into the agent, if you will. So, if the agent always needs to go off and search for knowledge, I'll say, okay, what it's often using this search term. I'm just going to do the search for it and pass the information. So, um, and that's where I think the real power of AI workflows and why that becomes important, because people are not now looking at, oh, I need to build an agent to do this. It's I need to build an AI workflow to do this, right? So um, it takes the onus off putting everything on an agent, where you can have this whole workflow that has agents do key pieces, but you still have some other code pieces and some other pieces that you're developing in there that makes the whole workflow more consistent, sustainable, and production ready.
Mm-hmm. Super exciting. Yeah. For the future, Mike, for the next 3 to 5 years, I know you cannot predict that probably accurately with the fast pace that AI is moving forward with, but any maybe ideas where agentic AI is moving towards in terms of like how it will change the job landscape, how people need to evolve also in terms of the skill set, but also what agentic systems will be capable of in the next coming years.
Yeah, so I see like there's this obviously the debate of, is agents going to replace everyone's jobs, or is AI or
Mm.
agents as part of AI going to replace everyone's jobs? I think it's going to change the way we work. It's already changed the way I work. Like most of my code now is being developed by large language models, right? I'll go off and I don't even, I might just start writing a piece of code and then I'll have the LLM finish it a lot of times. I'll just tweak it, modify it, and stuff like that. So, I mean, as a programmer, that's changed the whole way I've changed doing programming. It's not going to replace me because you're still doing so many high level tasks and coordinating things that I don't think it's an opportunity to replace me. It does make me more efficient, it does make me a lot more efficient and powerful when I'm doing. And I think for a lot of things, I think jobs are going to be more, it's almost like the job of going off and doing these mini tasks and stuff like that. We don't necessarily need to have somebody do those anymore. So we can actually have somebody come in and coordinate all these mini jobs and become more powerful. So I think we're going to be opening up into an era of productivity, how that sort of scales to what that looks like and how companies hire people. Like in my company, we're still hiring lots of people and stuff like that for a number of different tasks and roles. In the next 3 to 5 years, I see it as they'll be more intrinsic in our lives without us knowing about them. I think a lot more companies are going to start building agentic systems and just say, here, this is our AI. And they won't sort of tell you what's under the covers, but it'll be agents and a bunch of agents doing things and sort of pushing a whole bunch of stuff together. Like there'll be a whole bunch of automations and stuff, I think.
Hmm. Excellent, Michael. Thank you very much for all these insights during this podcast for this show. Where can people find your book? How they can get in touch with you? And maybe you have a website that you want to place right here.
Yeah, so you can find my book through Manning Publications, or I think the first edition is still on Amazon. And the second edition, I've updated almost 8 chapters because a lot of the whole AI and the way we worked on agents now has changed so much.
I see. Cool. Michael, thank you very much. And hopefully there will be a second part in the future. Maybe talk about the combination of deep reinforcement learning and agentic systems.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.